My name is Margaret Keene, and I'm 47 years old. The coffee in my travel mug was still warm when I pulled into the client's driveway at dawn. I like to arrive early for moving days. Seniors appreciated the extra time and calm approach. As I gathered my clipboard from the passenger seat, a familiar voice caught my attention. My colleague VCA was parked 2 houses down on her phone, completely unaware of my arrival. "She has to go into early retirement," she said with a laugh that chilled me despite the morning heat. "I've already spoken with the investors. Once we push Mary out, we can drop the handholding and triple our client load." My clipboard froze midair. 8 years. 8 years I'd spent building gentle transitions from a one-woman operation to the most respected senior relocation service in the region. We didn't just move boxes. We helped elderly clients transition to new chapters with dignity, preserving their most treasured possessions and memories while sensitively managing the downsizing process. "The board meeting next month is perfect timing," VCA continued, her voice carrying clearly through my open window. "We'll present the new business model, and by then I'll have documentation of all her inefficiencies. Between the missed appointments and her refusal to standardize our processes, we have plenty to justify a leadership change." Missed appointments? I'd rescheduled exactly twice in 3 years. Once for pneumonia, and once when Mrs. Landry had a panic attack and needed me to stay 3 hours past our scheduled time. "Trust me, she won't see it coming," VCA laughed again. "Mary still thinks I joined because I believe in her mission, like holding an old lady's hand while she sorts through 50 years of Christmas ornaments, is a sustainable business model." I sat perfectly still, afraid even breathing would alert her to my presence. 3 years ago, I'd been impressed by VCA's seemingly genuine enthusiasm for our work and her marketing expertise. I'd even made her a partner last year, believing her suggestions for efficiency improvements were meant to help our clients. "Look, I need to go. I've got that Wellington move this morning with her." "Yeah, another 6 hours to pack up some ancient widow's china collection that her kids will just throw away anyway." There was a pause. "Don't worry, 6 more weeks and gentle transitions will have a whole new meaning. Just be ready with the capital when I call." I heard her car door slam. Somehow, I managed to slide down in my seat just as she walked past, heading toward the Wellington house. I watched through the rearview mirror as she plastered on a warm smile before knocking on Mrs. Wellington's door. My hands were shaking. Retirement at 47? And what did she mean by investors? Our business was privately held, just the two of us as partners with 13 employees. There were no investors, unless that's what she'd been doing on all those marketing trips to the city, finding people willing to finance a takeover of my life's work. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was hearing how she truly felt about our clients. People like Mrs. Wellington, who'd lost her husband of 62 years just 3 months ago and was now leaving the only home they'd ever shared together. People who deserved patience and understanding during one of the most difficult transitions of their lives. I forced myself to breathe deeply. Then I checked my face in the mirror, straightened my blouse, and prepared to face the day as if my entire world hadn't just collapsed around me. "Good morning, Mrs. Wellington," I called out when I reached the doorstep, my voice somehow steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Are we ready for the big day?" Mrs. Wellington stood in the doorway, her tiny frame dwarfed by the 2-story colonial behind her. At 89, her posture remained remarkably straight, though her hands showed the telltale tremors of someone who'd lived nearly 9 decades. "Mary, thank goodness you're here," she said, pulling me into a fragile hug that smelled of lavender and talcum powder. "I was just telling VCA that I changed my mind about the dining set. My granddaughter is driving up from Charlotte to take it after all." "That's wonderful news," I said, following her inside where VCA was already sorting through kitchen cabinets with efficient, impersonal movements. "Morning, Mary," VCA said without turning around. "I've started on the kitchen since we're already behind schedule. The moving team called, and they'll be here in 3 hours instead of 4. Behind schedule? I was 15 minutes early. I didn't receive any notification about a schedule change, I said, keeping my voice light. I told Andrew to call you, she replied smoothly. He must have forgotten. Anyway, we need to pick up the pace if we're going to finish today. I watched her hands as she wrapped Mrs. Wellington's crystal glasses in paper, her movements quick and careless. These weren't just objects. They were memories. Each piece told a story of holiday gatherings, family celebrations, everyday moments that formed the tapestry of a life well lived. Mrs. Wellington, I said, turning to our client, why don't we start with your memory chest while VCA handles the kitchen? I know you wanted to personally decide what goes into it. The memory chest was something I created for every client, a specially designed box for the most precious keepsakes that would make their new space immediately feel like home. It was always unpacked first at the new residence. Oh, yes, please, Mrs. Wellington said, her face lighting up. I've been thinking about what to include all week. As we walked toward the study, I caught VCA rolling her eyes. 6 more weeks, she'd said. 6 weeks until she planned to push me out of my own company. Little did she know, her plan had just failed before it even began. For 3 weeks, I said nothing about what I'd overheard. I watched VCA's subtle campaign, scheduling expedited consultations when I was handling complex moves, suggesting standardized packages that eliminated personalization, gradually repositioning our service as streamlined senior solutions rather than the high-touch approach that defined us. I observed as she spent more time closed in her office, speaking in hushed tones on calls that abruptly ended when I approached. I noticed how she'd begun meeting individually with some of our newer employees, those who hadn't been with us long enough to understand our core philosophy. When she proposed a team retreat to realign our processes for growth, I enthusiastically supported her. You organize it, I said during our weekly partner meeting. This is your opportunity to shape our future direction. Her eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected me to relinquish control so easily. Are you sure? It's a significant expense. Absolutely, I smiled. You've been pushing for these changes for months. I think it's time I listened. 3 days should be enough, don't you think? Take the team somewhere nice. What VCA didn't realize was that, in our industry, the true assets weren't physical inventory or even the business entity itself. The value lay in trusted relationships with retirement communities, elder law attorneys, estate planners, and, most importantly, our clients and their adult children who provided countless referrals. These relationships were mine. I had built them one conversation, one thoughtful gesture, one successfully managed transition at a time, and now I had 3 days to decide exactly what to do with them. If you're watching this story, you probably know what it feels like when someone you trusted completely betrays you. That moment when your world shifts and you realize nothing is what you thought it was. If you've been there, hit that like button. And if you're wondering what happened next, how I handled discovering my business partner was secretly plotting to force me out of my own company, subscribe now because this story has twists you won't see coming. Before founding Gentle Transitions, I worked as a hospital discharge planner, helping elderly patients navigate the complex process of returning home or moving to assisted living facilities after medical stays. I noticed a pattern. No matter how medically stable these seniors were, the stress of relocating often sent them spiraling back into decline. The physical labor was challenging enough, but the emotional toll of leaving homes filled with decades of memories frequently proved overwhelming. That's when I had my idea, a relocation service specifically designed for seniors, not just movers who carried boxes, but trained professionals who understood the emotional weight of each item, who could help clients navigate the grief of downsizing while preserving what mattered most. I remortgaged my modest 2-bedroom home, cashed in my 401k, and launched Gentle Transitions at age 39. The first year nearly broke me. I worked 7 days a week, handling every aspect of the business myself. There were nights I fell asleep at my kitchen table, surrounded by client files, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then came Mrs. Abernathy, a 92-year-old widow moving from her four-bedroom Victorian to a one-bedroom apartment in assisted living. When I arrived for our consultation, she showed me a neatly penned list titled, "Things I Cannot Leave Behind." It included practical items like her bed and reading chair, but also 37 houseplants she'd nurtured for decades and a collection of over 200 thimbles gathered from her travels. "The facility says I can only bring 20% of my belongings," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "But how do I measure 40 years of memories in percentages?" That day, I spent 6 hours helping Mrs. Abernathy photograph and catalog her plants and thimbles. We created a beautiful, hardbound book so she could keep them with her visually, even if not physically. For the plants, I found homes among her neighbors and arranged a weekly schedule for her to visit them. When we finally moved her 3 weeks later, the transition was seamless. Instead of trauma, Mrs. Abernathy experienced a well-managed change that preserved her dignity and honored her life's collections in new ways. Word spread quickly. Within months, Gentle Transitions had a waiting list. By year 3, I had hired 8 employees, all trained in my methodology of compassionate relocation. We focused on the human aspects of moving, the emotional landscape beneath the physical belongings. That's when VCA entered the picture. I met her at a senior care conference where I was presenting on trauma-informed approaches to relocation. She approached me afterward, eyes alight with enthusiasm, speaking rapidly about how moved she was by my presentation. With her background in marketing and business development, she offered a compelling vision of how Gentle Transitions could help even more seniors without sacrificing our core values. "Your approach is revolutionary," she told me over coffee, "but you're thinking too small. With the right structure, you could franchise this concept nationally. Think about how many more seniors you could help." I was wary of expansion that might dilute our personalized approach, but VCA was persuasive. "Growth doesn't have to mean compromise," she insisted. "It just means helping more people the right way." Her energy was infectious, her business acumen impressive. 3 months later, I hired her as our marketing director. Within a year, I'd made her a partner with a 25% stake in the company. At first, everything seemed perfect. Our client base grew steadily, and VCA helped systematize some of our back-office functions, freeing up more time for client care. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with small suggestions. Do we really need 3 planning sessions per client? Then, what if we created standard packages instead of these custom approaches? And finally, we could double our client load if we reduced average interaction time by 30%. Each time I pushed back, explaining that our reputation was built on personalization. Each time she would smile and say, "Just thinking out loud." But the suggestions never stopped. Now, sitting in my home office the evening after overhearing her call, I finally understood. VCA hadn't joined Gentle Transitions because she believed in our mission. She'd targeted me, as a business opportunity. Find a successful but inefficient service business. Streamline it by cutting the very things that made it special. Then scale it for maximum profit. I pulled out our partnership agreement, reading through every clause as midnight approached. There it was in section 12.3. Either partner could be removed for cause with a majority board vote. Currently, our board consisted of just the 2 of us, so this provision seemed meaningless when we signed it, unless VCA had secretly formed relationships with potential investors who could buy in and create that majority. My phone chimed with a text from VCA. "Booked the Lakeside Conference Center for our retreat. Team seems excited. 3 days to reshape our future." I stared at her message, ice forming in my stomach. 3 days. That's how long I had to decide. Fight for control of a company that was already being poisoned from within, or find another path forward. I typed back, "Perfect. Looking forward to it." Then I opened a new document on my computer and titled it Plan B. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. At 6:30 a.m., the converted Victorian house that served as our headquarters was silent and still. I liked it this way, peaceful, before the bustle of daily operations began. I made coffee in the small kitchen and carried it to my office, where I began reviewing our client files. Not the digital ones that lived on our shared server, but my personal notes kept in a locked cabinet, handwritten observations about each client's unique needs, preferences, and emotional patterns during their transition. These notes contain the true methodology of gentle transitions, the human insights no standardized process could replicate. I was so absorbed in my review that I didn't hear VCA enter. "You're here early," she said from the doorway, making me start. I closed the file casually, just preparing for the Webster move tomorrow. "You know how complex their situation is." She leaned against the doorframe, coffee mug in hand. "About that, I was thinking Dominic could handle the Websters. You and I need to review the presentation for the retreat." Dominic was our newest hire, barely 3 months with the company and still learning our approach. "The Websters specifically requested me," I replied. "Mrs. Webster has early-stage dementia, and they need our most experienced team." VCA waved her hand dismissively. "Dominic needs to gain experience with complex cases. I'll have him call the family today to introduce himself." Before I could protest, she continued, "Oh, and I've invited someone to join us for the final day of the retreat. A business consultant I know who specializes in scaling service businesses. I think you'll find his perspective valuable." The pieces clicked into place. This consultant was likely one of her investors, coming to evaluate the company and me before making their move. "Sounds interesting," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm always open to new perspectives." She seemed momentarily thrown by my lack of resistance, then recovered. "Great. I'll send you the retreat agenda by end of day." After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the door. The timeline had accelerated. Whatever VCA was planning would happen at or immediately after this retreat. I had less time than I thought. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. "Thaddeus, it's Mary Keene. I need your advice on a business matter. Can we meet today? It's urgent." 3 hours later, I sat across from Thaddeus Quinn in his wood-paneled office downtown. At 72, Thaddeus had technically retired from his elder law practice 5 years ago, but he still kept an office and advised a select few clients, mostly those he'd worked with for decades. I'd helped Thaddeus's mother relocate to assisted living when I first started Gentle Transitions. The experience had forged a bond between us, and he provided free legal counsel during my early years when I couldn't afford an attorney. "So, your partner is planning a hostile takeover," he said after I explained the situation, his bushy white eyebrows furrowing. "And you have 3 days before she makes her move." "That's my best guess," I replied. "The question is, what are my options?" Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Legally, you could fight this. You're the majority shareholder. But business disputes get messy and expensive, especially when emotions are involved. And in the meantime, the company culture would be poisoned," I added. "Even if I won, the damage to our client relationships could be irreparable." He nodded slowly. "So, what is it you really want, Mary? To keep control of Gentle Transitions or to preserve what makes it special?" The question struck me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on not losing my company that I hadn't considered whether the company itself was still worth fighting for. "I want to protect what we've built," I said finally. "The methodology, the relationships, the trust we've established with the senior community. But maybe Gentle Transitions isn't the only vessel for that mission." A slow smile spread across Thaddeus's face. "Now you're thinking like a true entrepreneur. The business is just a vehicle for your vision, not the vision itself. So, what do you suggest?" "That depends," he said, reaching for a yellow legal pad. "How much time do we have? And what assets can you leverage immediately? As we began to outline possibilities, a plan started forming, one that made my heart race with both anxiety and excitement. It wasn't about saving gentle transitions anymore. It was about preserving its soul while letting its shell go. There's just one more thing, Thaddeus said as our meeting concluded. Are you prepared for the emotional cost of this decision? You built this company from nothing. I thought about Mrs. Wellington's trembling hands your partner is planning a hostile takeover, he said after I explained the situation, his bushy white eyebrows furrowing. And you have 3 days before she makes her move. That's my best guess, I replied. The question is, what are my options? Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Legally, you could fight this. You're the majority shareholder, but business disputes get messy and expensive, especially when emotions are involved. And in the meantime, the company culture would be poisoned, I added. Even if I won, the damage to our client relationships could be irreparable. He nodded slowly. So, what is it you really want, Mary? To keep control of gentle transitions, or to preserve what makes it special? The question struck me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on not losing my company that I hadn't considered whether the company itself was still worth fighting for. I want to protect what we've built, I said finally. The methodology, the relationships, the trust we've established with the senior community. But maybe gentle transitions isn't the only vessel for that mission. A slow smile spread across Thaddeus's face. Now you're thinking like a true entrepreneur. The business is just a vehicle for your vision, not the vision itself. So, what do you suggest? That depends, he said, reaching for a yellow legal pad. How much time do we have? And what assets can you leverage immediately? As we began to outline possibilities, a plan started forming, one that made my heart race with both anxiety and excitement. It wasn't about saving gentle transitions anymore. It was about preserving its soul while letting its shell go. There's just one more thing, Thaddeus said as our meeting concluded. Are you prepared for the emotional cost of this decision? You built this company from nothing. I thought about Mrs. Wellington's trembling hands as she packed away 62 years of marriage, about Mrs. Abernathy and her precious plants and thimbles, about all the seniors who trusted me to guide them through letting go of one life to begin another. I said, my voice steady. After all, I've spent 8 years helping people navigate transitions with grace. It's time to practice what I preach. As I left Thaddeus's office, my phone buzzed with an email notification. VCA had sent the retreat agenda. The final item on day 3 was simply listed as strategic restructuring announcement. My time had just run out. I returned to the office with my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but at least I now had a direction. As I walked through the front door, our receptionist, Zora, waved me over. At 23, she was our youngest team member, but her natural empathy made her exceptionally skilled at calming anxious clients. Mrs. Ingersoll called 3 times while you were out, Zora whispered, glancing toward VCA's closed office door. She's really upset about something Dominic told her. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Ingersoll was an 84-year-old widow moving from her family farm to a retirement community next month. We'd spent weeks creating a detailed transition plan for her prized collection of handmade quilts that represented 5 generations of her family's history. What happened? I asked. Dominic told her we couldn't accommodate individual storage solutions for all 30 quilts in her new apartment and suggested she choose her 10 favorites and donate the rest. I closed my eyes briefly. This was exactly the kind of efficiency VCA had been pushing, treating irreplaceable family treasures as logistical problems to be solved. I'll call her right away, I said. And Zora, if you receive any other calls like this, please direct them to me personally, not Dominic or VCA. Already doing that, she replied with a knowing look that made me wonder how much our staff had already noticed about the shifting dynamics in the company. In my office, I called Mrs. Ingersoll and spent 30 minutes reassuring her that yes, we would find a way to preserve all her quilts. We discussed shadow boxes for the walls, a custom storage ottoman, and even a rotating display system so she could change which quilts were visible seasonally. "Oh, Mary," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "When that young man told me I needed to give most of them away, I couldn't sleep all night. These quilts are my mother's voice, my grandmother's hands. How could I choose between them?" "You don't have to," I promised. "That's not how we work." Except increasingly, it was how VCA wanted us to work. After hanging up, I pulled out a notebook and began making a list of our most vulnerable current and upcoming clients, those whose transitions would be most disrupted if VCA's efficiency measures were suddenly implemented. Next to each name, I wrote detailed notes about their specific needs and concerns. As I worked, another idea began forming. I reached for my phone and called Irina Delaney, the director of residential life at Meadowbrook, the largest retirement community in our area and one of our biggest referral sources. "Irina, it's Mary. Do you have time for coffee tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." The Lakeside Conference Center was exactly the kind of place VCA would choose: sleek, modern, and expensive. As our team of 15 arrived for the retreat, I watched how VCA worked the room, pulling aside small groups for quiet conversations, laying groundwork for whatever announcement she planned for the final day. I played my part perfectly, enthusiastic, engaged, and completely oblivious to her machinations. When VCA presented her vision for Gentle Transitions 2.0 on the first day, I nodded along with apparent interest as she outlined standardized packages, reduced consultation times, and technology-enhanced client experiences that would allow us to handle 3 times our current client load. "The senior market is expanding exponentially," she told the team, her voice rising with excitement. "Baby boomers are hitting retirement age at the rate of 10,000 per day. If we position ourselves correctly now, we can become the dominant provider in this space within 3 years." I noticed how some of our newer employees leaned forward, captivated by her vision of growth and increased revenue. But our veteran team members exchanged subtle glances, their expressions guarded. During breaks, I made a point to connect individually with each of our longest-serving employees, not to warn them or recruit them, just to reinforce our shared values and history. I didn't need to say anything explicit. They knew me well enough to read between the lines. "Interesting direction VCA is proposing," commented Lynette, our operations coordinator, who'd been with me for 6 years. "Seems like a fundamental shift from your founding vision." I just smiled. Change is inevitable in any business. The question is always which changes serve our ultimate purpose. She studied my face for a moment. "And what exactly is our purpose, Mary? I sometimes wonder if everyone here still agrees on that." "Our purpose has never changed," I replied quietly. "We help people honor their past while embracing their future. Everything else is just methodology." On the second day, while the team participated in VCA's efficiency workshops, I excused myself for a series of urgent client calls. In reality, I was driving to meetings I'd arranged with key contacts throughout the senior care community: retirement home directors, elder law attorneys, geriatric care managers, and estate planners who had referred clients to us for years. "I've heard remarkable things about your company." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I'm interested to hear your thoughts on our business." "I think you'll find my perspective illuminating," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "VCA has shared your methodology and client data, and I see tremendous scaling potential." I raised an eyebrow at VCA. "You shared our proprietary methodology and client information without consulting me." A flash of panic crossed her face before Hamilton smoothly intervened. "Only in the broadest terms, I assure you. Professional confidentiality is paramount in my work." Before I could respond, team members began filtering into the room, and the moment for confrontation passed. I took my seat at the front table, outwardly composed while my mind raced through final preparations. The morning session proceeded according to VCA's agenda. Team presentations on the workshops from yesterday, discussion of process improvements, and a seemingly endless PowerPoint from Hamilton about market positioning for maximum growth velocity. Throughout it all, I smiled and nodded, occasionally asking questions that gave the impression of engagement. If VCA found my compliance suspicious, she didn't show it. After lunch, it was time for the strategic restructuring announcement that concluded the retreat agenda. VCA stood at the podium, practically vibrating with poorly concealed triumph. Over the past 3 days, we've explored ways to evolve gentle transitions from a boutique service to a national leader in senior transitions, she began. I'm excited to announce that we have an opportunity to make that evolution happen immediately. She gestured toward Hamilton, who stood and joined her at the front of the room, ged at the audacity of that last claim. This investment would allow us to open offices in 15 new markets within 18 months, she continued. It would mean new opportunities for everyone in this room. Management positions, equity participation, and significantly increased compensation as we grow. I watched our team's reactions carefully. The newer employees looked excited by the prospect of advancement. The veterans appeared more cautious, glancing between VCA and me with uncertainty. Of course, this kind of growth requires structural changes, VCA said, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. Apex's investment model includes the creation of a professional board to guide strategic decisions while allowing our founders to focus on their areas of strength rather than day-to-day operations. And there it was, the carefully worded announcement of my effective demotion. I felt 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting for my reaction. Slowly, I stood and moved to the front of the room, standing beside VCA and Hamilton. Thank you, VCA, for bringing this opportunity to our attention, I said calmly. And thank you, Hamilton, for your interest in our company. Before we discuss this further, I'd like to share some news of my own. Confusion flickered across VCA's face. This wasn't in her script. I turned to address our team directly. Gentle Transitions has always been about helping people navigate significant life changes with dignity and personalized care. That mission remains my passion and purpose. I paused, meeting the eyes of each team member before continuing. Over the past few weeks, I've been approached by a consortium of retirement communities who want to bring our transition methodology in-house. After careful consideration, I've decided to accept their offer to create and implement resident transition programs across their network. The room went completely silent. VCA's expression froze somewhere between shock and horror. What exactly are you saying? She demanded, her voice strained. I'm saying that as of 9 a.m. this morning, I have tendered my resignation as CEO of Gentle Transitions. I replied evenly. I've accepted a position creating transition programs for this consortium of retirement communities. Hamilton's professional demeanor slipped. This is highly irregular. We were not informed of any pending leadership changes. I apologize for the surprise, I said, not sounding sorry at all. But decisions about my career path don't require prior notification to potential investors I've never met. I turned back to the team, many of whom looked stunned. I want to be clear. I have not sold Gentle Transitions. I've simply chosen to pursue a new chapter professionally. Each of you will need to make your own decisions about your futures. VCA recovered enough to attempt damage control. This is obviously unexpected news, but it doesn't change the opportunity before us. Mary's departure simply accelerates our transition to new leadership. The investment offer stands. Hamilton nodded, though he looked considerably less confident than before. Absolutely. While Ms. Keene's expertise would have been valuable, the business model and client base remain attractive assets. I smiled slightly. About that client base, I should mention that my new position includes exclusivity provisions. The Retirement Community Consortium has agreed to refer all future senior relocations exclusively to service providers who adhere to certain standards. Standards that include minimum consultation hours, personalized transition planning, and ongoing support services. VCA's face paled as she began to understand the implications. Those standards, I continued, will be defined and certified by me in my new role. Providers who meet them will receive a gentle transition certified designation that all consortium members will recognize and recommend to their incoming residents. Hamilton's eyes narrowed. You're creating a competing certification program. Not competing, I corrected. I'm establishing quality standards for senior transition services based on the methodology I developed over 8 years. Any company can apply for certification if they meet those standards, including gentle transitions. Of course, VCA said quickly. Though, given your presentation yesterday about tripling client loads through standardized packages and reduced consultation times, I'm not certain the company's new direction would qualify. The tension in the room was palpable. Our veteran team members were exchanging glances, some with barely concealed smiles. They understood exactly what I'd done. If you'll excuse me, I said, gathering my notes. My first meeting with the consortium board begins in an hour. I need to leave now to make it on time. As I turned to go, Lynette stood up. Mary, wait. I have a question. I paused, turning back to her. This new venture of yours, are you hiring? The room fell silent at Lynette's question. VCA's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and betrayal that might have been comical under different circumstances. As a matter of fact, I replied calmly, the consortium has approved budget for a transition team. I'll need experienced professionals who understand our methodology and share our values. Zora stood up next. Count me in. One by one, 8 of our 15 employees rose from their seats. All veterans who had been with the company for at least 2 years. All people who understood that our success wasn't built on efficiency metrics, but on genuine human connection. Hamilton cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to process this development. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. My team and I will clear our belongings from the conference room. As we gathered our materials, VCA grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging in slightly. What have you done? She hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I met her gaze steadily. Exactly what you taught me to do. I identified an opportunity and leveraged my assets to maximize value. This is sabotage, she whispered furiously. You can't just walk away with half the staff and expect the company to survive. Actually, I corrected her. I'm walking away with 8 staff members who share my vision. You're keeping 7 who align with yours. Seems fair. And our clients? What about them? That's entirely up to you, I said. If you choose to maintain the standards of care that built our reputation, you'll likely keep many of them. If you implement your streamlined approach, well, the market will decide. Her face flushed with anger. This isn't over. The partnership agreement has non-compete clauses. I'll sue. I smiled slightly. You might want to review Section 17.4 of that agreement. It specifically exempts consulting services provided to residential facilities from the non-compete provisions. Thaddeus was quite thorough when he drafted it. The color drained from her face as she realized I'd planned this meticulously. You recorded our conversation on the dock last night, didn't you? Consider it insurance I hope never to need, I replied quietly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. My new team and I set up temporary headquarters in a conference room at Meadowbrook Retirement Community while we searched for permanent office space. The consortium, 7 retirement communities representing over 2,000 residential units across the region, formalized our agreement with contracts that guaranteed exclusivity in exchange for implementing my transition methodology. My salary would be supplemented by licensing fees from any outside moving companies that obtain my certification. Meanwhile, I received increasingly desperate messages from VCA. First came anger. You'll regret this betrayal. Then bargaining. We can restructure the partnership to address your concerns. And finally, a grudging offer to buy out my majority stake in Gentle Transitions. I forwarded each message to Thaddeus without responding directly. On the fourth day, he called me. She's retained legal counsel, he informed me. They're threatening action based on tortious interference with business relationships. Do they have a case? I asked. Not a strong one, he replied. You've been careful to avoid directly soliciting clients. The employees chose to leave voluntarily, and the consortium arrangement doesn't technically prevent Gentle Transitions from doing business. It just creates a quality standard they'd need to meet. So, what's your recommendation? He was silent for a moment. Selling your shares would be the cleanest resolution. You've achieved your primary goal of preserving your methodology and relationships. The question is, what price makes walking away from the company you built worthwhile? I considered this. I'd invested 8 years of my life in Gentle Transitions. Every system, every relationship, every success story bore my fingerprints. What was that worth? 3 times annual revenue, I said finally. Non-negotiable. Thaddeus whistled. That's aggressive. Annual revenue is what? About $750,000. $780,000 last fiscal year, I confirmed. So you're asking for $2.34 million, he calculated, for a service business where the key service provider, you, is leaving. I'm not sure they can raise that kind of capital. That's not my problem, I replied, surprising myself with my hardness. If VCA wants control of the company so badly, she and her investors can pay what it's worth. I'll convey the offer, Thaddeus said, but prepare yourself for a counter. No counter came. Instead, 48 hours later, Thaddeus called with news that stunned me. They've accepted, he said, sounding slightly bewildered. Full asking price with only one condition. What condition? I asked suspiciously. They want to close immediately. Money wired today. Paperwork signed by end of business. They're in a hurry. I frowned. That's unusually fast. Did they say why? No, but I have a theory, Thaddeus replied. Hamilton's group specializes in acquiring service businesses, standardizing operations, then flipping them to larger companies within 18 to 24 months. My guess is they already have a potential buyer lined up, someone who values the Gentle Transitions brand and client list, but doesn't know the whole story. So, they're rushing to close before news of my departure and the consortium arrangement becomes public knowledge. I realized exactly. Once that information spreads, the value drops significantly. I considered this. Is there any legal obligation for me to disclose those facts to the buyers? Not explicitly, Thaddeus said carefully. The sale agreement covers the business entity, client list, and brand. Your personal plans and the consortium arrangement are separate matters. They haven't asked, and you're not obligated to volunteer that information. A part of me felt uncomfortable with this, but then I remembered VCA's casual cruelty toward our elderly clients, her dismissal of the very values that made our service meaningful, her calculated plan to push me out of my own company. Let's close today, I decided. And Thaddeus, add one more condition from our side. What's that? I want to keep the keys to the office until tomorrow morning. Tell them I need to retrieve some personal items tonight. After hours, by 5:30 p.m., the deal was done. $2.3 million had been wired to my account, slightly less than my asking price, after Thaddeus negotiated a small reduction in exchange for the expedited closing. I signed the final documents in Thaddeus's office, feeling strangely hollow as I transferred ownership of Gentle Transitions to VCA and her investors. 8 years of my life condensed to a signature on a legal document. Congratulations, Thaddeus said as he notarized the last page. You've just become a very wealthy woman. I nodded absently, my mind already elsewhere. Has the building's sale closed as well? This morning, he confirmed. The consortium now officially owns the Victorian. They've agreed to honor all existing leases that meet their standards for senior-focused businesses. And does Gentle Transitions know about the change in building ownership? Not yet, Thaddeus replied with the hint of a smile. That notification will go out to all tenants tomorrow morning. I gathered my copies of the sale documents and stood to leave. Thank you for everything, Thaddeus. I couldn't have done this without you. He rose and clasped my hand warmly. Your mother would be proud, Mary. She taught you well. The mention of my mother, who had struggled through her own difficult transition to assisted living before I founded Gentle Transitions, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She always said, "The true measure of a person isn't what they build," I replied softly, "but what they're willing to walk away from when it no longer serves its purpose." That evening, I entered the Victorian that had housed Gentle Transitions for the last 6 years. The building was quiet, the staff long gone for the day. I walked through each room slowly, taking inventory of memories. The consultation room where thousands of seniors had shared their fears and hopes about moving. The planning center with its wall-sized calendar where we mapped out each transition down to the minute. The small kitchen where we'd celebrated birthdays and client successes. I gathered a few personal items. Family photos, my mother's watercolor paintings that had hung in my office, a box of thank you cards from clients that I'd saved over the years. In the main entry hall, I paused at the large wooden sign that read, Gentle Transitions, honoring your past, embracing your future. I'd commissioned it from a local craftsman when we first moved into this space. My fingers traced the hand-carved letters, remembering how proud I'd felt the day it was installed. After collecting my belongings, I sat at my former desk and composed a letter. It took 7 drafts to get the wording exactly right, professional but pointed, informative without being vindictive. When I was satisfied, I printed 3 copies. I placed one in an envelope addressed to VCA and left it on her desk. The second copy I folded and slipped into my pocket. The third I taped to the front door of the building. Before leaving for the last time, I walked through each room again, turning off lights and closing doors. In the kitchen, I emptied the coffee pot and washed it carefully, a final act of stewardship. At the front entrance, I looked back at the darkened office that had been my second home for so many years. Then I stepped outside, locked the door, and slipped the keys into an envelope that I left in the mail slot. It was done. The next morning broke, clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day. I arrived at our new office space, a sunlit suite in a professional building adjacent to Meadowbrook, just before 8 a.m. My team was already there, arranging furniture and setting up workstations with an energy that was contagious. The consortium just sent over our first 10 client files. Lynette announced as I walked in. Seniors moving into their communities within the next month who need transition assistance. And I've had 3 calls already from outside moving companies interested in getting certified, Zora added. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Let's get to work, then. At precisely 9:15 a.m., my phone rang. The screen displayed VCA's name. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again and again and again. Finally, I answered. Hello, VCA. What have you done? She demanded, her voice shaking with fury. We can't get into the office. The keys don't work. I left the original keys in the mail slot last night as agreed. I replied calmly. If they're not working, you should contact the building owner. I did. Some woman named Irina Delaney answered. She says the building was sold yesterday to something called Meadowbrook Properties. Oh, I said mildly. Yes, I heard they were expanding their real estate holdings. She says all leases are under review. VCA continued, her voice rising. That tenants, need to demonstrate compatibility with their senior-focused business mission. What the hell does that mean? I believe it means the new owners are being selective about their tenants, I explained as if to a child. Meadowbrook is a retirement community. They naturally prefer businesses that align with their values regarding senior care. There was a moment of stunned silence before VCA exploded. You planned this. You orchestrated the whole thing. I simply introduced some people who had complementary interests, I replied. The consortium wanted to expand their services for seniors. Meadowbrook wanted to diversify their real estate holdings. It was a natural fit. This is outrageous, she sputtered. We bought Gentle Transitions yesterday. We have client appointments scheduled today. And I'm sure you'll find suitable alternative office space quickly, I said. Though, you might want to read the letter I left before you reschedule those appointments. What letter? The one on your desk. It explains that I've accepted a position with a retirement community consortium developing transition programs for their residents. It also mentions that 8 of our staff have chosen to join me in this new venture. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Oh, and it notes that the consortium, which represents 7 retirement communities housing over 1,000 seniors, has established quality standards for any relocation services they'll recommend to incoming residents. You can't do this, she whispered, but there was a note of defeat creeping into her voice. We paid $2.3 million for this company. You paid $2.3 million for a business entity, a client list, and a brand name. I corrected her. All of which you received. What you didn't pay for was me, my methodology, or the relationships I've built over 8 years. Those weren't for sale. The investors will sue, she threatened, but it sounded hollow even to her. For what? I asked. Failure to disclose information they never requested? Every statement in our sale agreement was factually accurate. If they assumed the company's value was independent of its founder, that's an expensive assumption, not a legal claim. Silence stretched between us. Finally, VCA spoke again, her voice flat. So, this was your plan all along. From the moment you overheard me on the phone. No, I replied honestly. My plan was to fight for control of Gentle Transitions. It was only when I realized you'd poisoned what we'd built that I decided to preserve its essence by letting go of its form. What's that supposed to mean? It means that Gentle Transitions was never about a name or a logo or an office building. It was about a philosophy of care, an idea, the belief that major life transitions deserve to be handled with dignity and personalized attention. That philosophy now lives at Margaret Keane Transition Consulting. The empty shell you purchased can be whatever you want it to be. I heard voices in the background on her end. Hamilton, I thought, demanding to know what was happening. I have to go, VCA said abruptly. This isn't over. But we both knew it was. As I ended the call, Lynette approached my desk with a concerned expression. Problem. I shook my head, smiling. Just tying up loose ends. Now, tell me about these new clients. 6 months later, I stood at the podium accepting the Innovation in Resident Transition Award from the National Association of Senior Living Communities. The ballroom was filled with directors and staff from retirement communities across the country, all interested in implementing our transition program. This award recognizes Margaret Keane Transition Consulting for developing a methodology that preserves dignity and personal history during a vulnerable time, the presenter announced. Their approach has demonstrably improved resident satisfaction and reduced transition-related stress by over 60% in participating communities. As applause filled the room, I caught sight of a familiar face near the back. VCA, looking significantly less polished than I remembered, sat at a table with representatives from various moving companies. According to industry gossip, Gentle Transitions had pivoted to general moving services after losing most of their senior clientele. The investors had cut their losses and sold to a national chain for pennies on the dollar. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. She looked away first. At the reception following the ceremony, Irina approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. "To sweet success," she toasted, handing me one. "I heard Gentle Transitions finally vacated the Victorian last week. Apparently, they couldn't meet our standards for lease renewal." I shrugged, sipping my champagne. The market has a way of correcting itself. "Speaking of the market," Irina continued, "3 more retirement communities have contacted us about joining the consortium. If they do, we'll need to expand your team again." "I'll start interviewing next week," I promised. As I circulated through the reception, accepting congratulations and discussing implementation details with interested communities, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey hadn't been what I expected, but the destination was exactly where I needed to be. Later that evening, I returned to my hotel room and opened my laptop to find dozens of messages from seniors and their families thanking us for making their transitions smoother and less stressful. One in particular caught my eye, a note from Mrs. Wellington, whose move had coincided with the day I overheard VCA's betrayal. "Dear Mary," she'd written, "I wanted you to know that 6 months into my new life, I finally feel at home. The memory chest you created with me sits in my living room, and each item inside reminds me that while I've left my house behind, I brought my home with me. Thank you for understanding the difference." I smiled as I closed my laptop. Some might view what happened as a story of revenge, but I saw it differently. It was a story of preservation, of values worth protecting, and a mission worth fighting for, even if that meant letting go of something I'd built. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to hold on tighter, but to release with purpose, watching what you've created transform into something even more meaningful than you imagined. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Did you fight to keep what was yours? Or did you find freedom in letting go and starting fresh? And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience, reinvention, and the sweet satisfaction of building something better after loss. Remember, sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a more authentic beginning.